is beginning to turn. And now, okay, now watch out what you say. It's all recorded. So our Torah reading is Parashat Nasso. It's the second portion in the book of Bamidbar. And it's a continuation of the first portion and a development. It begins on 791 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, and it is the book of Numbers, chapter 4, starting with verse 21. So that's the starting point in this Torah portion, and the whole beginning of the book of Bamidbar, the first three Torah portions going into next week is about the collecting of the Jewish people into an organized mass to move away from Mount Sinai. So actually the whole book of Leviticus is this in-depth presentation of all kinds of rules and regulations for creating a holy way of life. And that all takes place while the children of Israel are still at Mount Sinai. When we open the book of Bamidbar at the start, chapter 1, verse 1, we have the Eternal spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month, the second year since they went out of Egypt. So that means they went out of Egypt in the first month of the first year, in the middle of that month, on the 15th of Nisan. So this is now the second month. So the anniversary of leaving Egypt, the first anniversary has passed. And 2 weeks after the first anniversary of the Exodus is where we are in the opening of the book of Bamidbar, right? So 1 year and 2 weeks since we got out of Egypt. And most of that time, right? It took us in not 50 days, but it took us half a month and then a month and another, whatever it is. Yeah, a month and a half to get to Mount Sinai. Then we got the Torah on the 50th day after leaving Egypt. So we've been hanging around Mount Sinai, and now the issue is it's time to leave. It's time to move on. As I'm speaking, I'm thinking, eventually we really will, God willing, move on from our own little Mount Sinai's here, our own little isolated, safe spaces. And that's going to be an interesting transformation, right? That's going to have all kinds of repercussions for us practically, but also emotionally and psychologically. When we change that routine that we are now in, whether we like it or whether we actually hate it, it doesn't matter. When this routine will change, that's going to be an upheaval, right? That's going to be a whole, big deal to cope with in our lives, and that's what's happening with the people of Israel now. They know that they're going to leave very soon. They will leave next week, in next week's Torah portion. And now it's all about getting everything together and making sure that when we leave without chaos. We leave with everybody accounted for. We leave with some kind of system in place to keep us all in one piece. And it's pretty boring reading, but it's also essential work that had to be done. It's real, like ground on the ground organizing, so to speak. And I say that as a person who really can't deal with this stuff. I'm not one of those guys that really loves to go out and do community organizing, but I want to tip my hat to those people who can, because without them, there would be nothing. We see the demonstrations that are happening today. and all through the week and into the next week. They need coordination. And of course, back then they didn't have social media, and they didn't have the emails, and didn't have the Zooming, and didn't have any of that stuff. But somehow or other, they needed to herd all the cats of the Jewish people together and get them to be ready to proceed as one people. So that's what's going on here last week in the beginning of the book of Bamidbar, and that's what's going on continuing in this week's Torah reading. So the beginning is continuing with talking about the Levites and all of the work that they have to do, because they are, for the temple, the shrine, the tabernacle, the Mishkan, they are the essential workers. They are the essential workers for maintenance and clean and moving and hauling and getting everything together. So that's the continuation of the beginning of the discussion. That is the beginning of our Torah reading. Then we have, starting with chapter 5, we have a dicey, short little subject. And then it goes into another dicey topic. And then it goes into another dicey topic. So there's a whole bunch of rules that are thrown into this story, which may not be so obviously connected. The beginning of it is that once, chapter 5, the beginning, once we set up a camp, once we identify the parameters of that camp, the perimeters of that camp, once we say, here's the camp, by definition, we have created some other space that's outside the camp. Right? And I've written about this and taught about this. We create this holy encampment. At the heart of the encampment is the shrine, the tabernacle, the Mishkan. The Levites are stationed all around the tabernacle to be an honor guard and to be a real guard, a real protective force to make sure that nobody jumps into the tabernacle, which is holy, when they are not eligible to do so. Right? There's this whole fear of people contaminating, walking in as they are contaminated into the tabernacle, and that's a grave sin. So the holiness of the tabernacle has to be maintained. Then there's a concentric circle around that. All of the tribes are around that. And that encampment is considered in many ways also to require a level of ritual purity. So chapter 5 begins with saying there are certain people that the Torah has determined to be ritually impure in a special way. Not everybody is ritually impure. You can be ritually impure for all kinds of reasons and stay in the camp. But there are two examples given by the Torah of people who have to be taken out of the camp. That's the tsarua, the person who has tsara'at, which we always conveniently call leprosy. It's not, but whatever they have, if we've determined that that's what they have, they can't stay in the camp. And the other person that can't stay in the camp is the zav. A zav is a man who has genital discharge that is uncontrollable. There's some kind of pussy, bloody, icky kind of stuff it could be reminiscent of, some kind of diseases like gonorrhea or something, but again, it's not determined to be that. But such a person has to be taken out of the camp. And until such time as they ritually purify themselves, they can't come back into the camp. So there's a whole situation here of another zone, right? It's the suburbs, right? It's the suburbs of the encampment. Right outside the encampment is a whole other encampment. Unfortunately, we see this when we see like villages, tent villages of homeless people that find some kind of like no man's land someplace, and they set up some way to live. That's what happens here. What happens is that the Torah says those people are going to have to go out, and it leaves that issue of how do you organize that? How do we make sure that they have food? How do we make sure that they have shelter? It says not a word. It never says a word about how to take care of those people. It leaves it up to us. It leaves it up to family members. It leaves it up to society itself. So, I mean, it's always struck me as a very, very stark kind of phenomenon where the Torah has so much to say, where it's almost like too much about organizing the camp and how important the camp is. And the camp is the community. And yet, the very nature of that community is that there are people from that community who will temporarily not be able to be part of that community. And how we deal with that, the Torah says nothing. And it's up to us. So one message you could get is the Torah doesn't care. You know, one message that you could get is those people don't count. So let me throw that out as a challenge. How must we argue that that cannot be the message? Why am I convinced? Why am I convinced? And why do I hope you're convinced? That cannot possibly be the message. That the Torah's silence, the Torah kicks them out of the camp and says not a word about them, about what to do with them. It cannot be that the Torah doesn't care about what happens to them. How could we argue that?
Well, perhaps because there are other places where there are procedures for someone who is ritually impure to become pure, so that there isn't a sense that this is a permanent condition.
Okay, Alan wanted to say something.
No, I was kind of the same. I mean, these people are not, criminals or murderers that are being treated in some form of that requires some level of punishment. These are people that need to be somehow separated, and these people are still children of God, made in the image of God. People that still are entitled to the concept of love them as you would want to love yourself. And how could we possibly dismiss them if we believe those things to be true of how we live our lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think both of those points are very important, and it's very, again, striking to me that those points are never said explicitly in the Torah, right? They're never addressed in that kind of like clear way. The Torah takes it for granted. This is where, there's all of this pronouncements. God said this, and God said this to Moses, and Moses told the children of Israel, and there's all of this, I mean, words and more and more and more pages of words. This is a silence. This is the white spaces in between the black spaces, in between the letters, where the Torah is almost, if we believe that what you guys are saying, which is, I think, necessary. The Torah does say, here's the procedure for getting this person back. So, it would be quite a dishonesty if the Torah, said, okay, throw them to the dogs, let them be like the scapegoat that goes out into the wilderness and then dies. I don't care. When the Torah then, is constantly saying, go out and check on them and see if they're ritually pure yet, and then purify them and then bring them back. Right? So clearly, the point is that they have to be brought back. Clearly, they are expected to resume life in the camp. But like you say, they're not criminals, and yet, from the human psychology is really, really good at demonizing people who don't go along with the flow for whatever reason, right? People who are physically handicapped, people who are sick, right? People who are in mourning, right? The fact that we have these, customs and practices that you have to visit somebody who's in mourning. Most people hate visiting somebody unless they're really closely connected. The idea that you're supposed to give support to somebody who's in mourning is like so out of people's comfort zone. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about zones and about moving from one zone to another. It occurs to me that the Torah, as you quoted, love your neighbor as yourself, love the other person as you would yourself. How would you like to, be treated if you became a leper or something like that? Wouldn't you want people to check up on you? Wouldn't you want people, to come by and hang out on the front porch with social distancing, which is important, right? It's, you don't get ritually impure. So wouldn't you want that? So that stuff has been actually laid down as a value. So in a certain sense, what the Torah is saying in this kind of unsaid place is, I've told you enough. I told you enough for you to figure out these steps. Now it's yours. It's yours to figure it out. You're not going to do this by some kind of book of rules. I've given you enough rules. One of the rules also, I think, is the corollary of what Alan mentioned, and that is not just love your friend, your neighbor, your fellow as yourself, but we're also supposed to love the alien, the stranger. And we always think about the stranger, rightly so, as the person that's not really one of us. What we have in this little section is that it's possible for one of us to temporarily not be one of us. It's possible for every single bona fide Israelite to actually be turned into, and not by anything, no crime, nothing that they've done, nothing that they have control over. It's possible for a person who has a home, who knows exactly where their address is. I'm in the tribe of Reuven, 33 Reuven Street, there's where my tent is. That's what actually gets created here, this planned community. Everybody's got an address, everybody's got a place to be, and yet every single one of those people is susceptible to becoming a stranger. Every single one of those people is possibly could become, for no fault of their own and completely unexpectedly, homeless.
Right.
It's literally homeless.
Yeah.
It's literally, I don't have my home anymore. Yeah, Sarita.
So I'm just thinking of how important that perspective is, because if there's a sense that anyone could be in this situation, this could be any of us. And if we have to keep that in mind so that when we look at these people, we don't look at them as there's something wrong with them. They're second rate, because it could be us. I mean, that's the whole thing about, you think about people becoming homeless, or food insecure. We could be in that situation. Circumstances could change. So I think that that's an important perspective also that we have to maintain.
Right. I think that this is where the Torah is what's said, and the Torah is also what's not said, but that we're supposed to put in, that we're supposed to fill in based on what the Torah has already said. Another kind of analogy that comes to mind as we're talking, Tzaraat is a skin disease, right? Tzaraat is all of a sudden the surface of your body is beset with some kind of rashes and discolorations and stuff. It's literally superficial. It's totally superficial. And yes, I think that we don't like to look at people who don't look perfectly good and exactly the way we would like them to look. I think people of color have suffered a kind of a label of tzaraat from creation. There's something weird about white people who think that white is the norm. I mean, but I think that's accurate. I don't think I'm making this up. I don't think I'm being some lefty crazy person. When I say that the history of how white people have looked at people of color is really with this kind of like real queasiness about looking at somebody whose surface appearance doesn't match what they consider the norm, and therefore it's okay to kill them. I mean, it's like from what a jump, and yet that really is, in many ways, our history. It's pretty astounding that we have that kind of weakness of perception. Uh, yeah. I was going to say something else, and I lost it. What can I say? Yeah. I don't know that it's the other way around. I don't think. I mean, there was a kind of a shock that is reported, but how much do we trust what what reports we have? Because we don't have that many reports from the other side. But when people of color saw people of no color, like me, I have no color, right? They were a little shocked to see that there was somebody that looked not like them. I don't know that there was the same kind of reaction of deciding that other person must be some inferior creature. I don't know. When I was a kid, I remember very clearly. It was when I was in like daycare. I was in like a nursery school that was in, a family that in their home. I was dropped off by my parents, and they watched over me with a few other kids. And somewhere along the line, I was told to watch out for colored people. And I really remember very clearly that I imagined, people with swirling purple and yellow and rainbow colors. And, I was saying, I've never seen a colored person. I wonder what, those colored people that you have to watch out for, they must, so I was on the lookout for people of colors. And I never saw one. I never ended up seeing that until I figured out what they meant, which was pretty sad. Yeah. So that's a corollary of the establishing of a community with strict guidelines. I always ask if there's some topic that people want to dwell on. So I haven't done that yet. Is there some other topic that people want to get into? The next couple of sections of the Torah reading have discussions, some of which we've studied in the past. The suspected adulteress, right, or the woman who is suspected of straying, sotah, of straying from her husband. There's a whole ritual that goes on with that. Very problematic section. Yeah.
So you skipped over. So starting chapter 5, verse 5, is this section here when a man.
Oh yeah,
woman,
you're right.
And it's always been. I mean, I read the commentary of it, but it's still a little unclear to me exactly what the wrong is. And there's some things here that are confusing, and I don't recall looking at the section.
Okay, so let's do that. Great, thank you. Good suggestion. So we're on 794. That's chapter 5, verse 5. Okay. So go ahead. So you stepped up. You got to do it.
Yeah. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites. When a man or woman commits any wrong toward a fellow man, thus breaking faith with the Lord, and that person realizes his guilt, he shall confess the wrong that he has done. He shall make restitution in the principal amount and add 1/5 to it, giving it to him whom he has wronged. If the man has no kinsman to whom restitution can be made, the amount repaid shall go to the Lord for the priest, in addition to the ram of expiation with which expiation is made on his behalf. So too any gift among the sacred donations that the Israelites offer shall be the priest's, and each shall retain his sacred donations. Each priest shall keep what is given to him."
Right, and that's the end of that section. So that's another short legal section. And what the heck is going on? What's the sin? What's the expiation for? What are we talking about? So if you look at under the line, number 6, this passage. Could you read that, please?
Yes, this passage about confession and atonement for theft has prompted sages and commentators to offer several profound and important insights.
1 second, please. Good. Took care of it.
So I
they
saw
give
that
you
I
a
saw
very-
that it was interpreted as theft, but it doesn't really say that, although restitution implies some monetary thing.
Correct.
But
Correct.
this, yeah.
Right. So it goes back to the beginning of Leviticus. In the beginning of Leviticus, this discussion with this terminology first appears. And the discussions are about the word ma'al is trespass. Do we have that here? No, they just say
No, they don't.
lim'ol ma'al, breaking faith, right?
Yeah.
So breaking faith. It means, so yeah, it's like okay, it means breaking faith. That's good enough. So in Leviticus, there are two kinds of sins that are called this. One is if you misuse objects, animals that have been dedicated to God. That's one thing. You're not, once something has been dedicated to God, once something is supposed to be a sacrifice to God or a gift to the sanctuary, it's holy and it can't be misused. It can't be, crossing the boundary and saying, oh, it's for God's use. Well, I'll borrow it for a while and I'll use it. I'll plow my field and use it for my own needs. So that's a trespass. That's a ma'al. That's a me'ilah. That's a misuse of God's property, and there are all kinds of consequences and things that you have to do. And they divide up into two things. One is you have to restore what you stole or what you used, and the other is it's a sin. So if it's a sin, you have to ask God for forgiveness, and you have to bring a sacrifice to God to make things smooth, right? To straighten things out. The same terminology is then used in Leviticus for what happens if you steal from a human being, not from God. What if you take something from another human being, and then it expands it and talks about things like, for instance, I lend Alan $100, and then Alan, when I ask him for it, he denies it, which, something Alan would do. Sorry, just kidding. But Audrey saw me lend the money to Alan, and she's a witness, but she's a friend of Alan's, right? I'm making this all up, right? So, and when I come to Audrey and I say, I want to go and sue Alan for my $100, I want you to come to court and back me up. And Audrey refuses. So has Audrey stolen any money from me? Of course not, right? She didn't pick my pocket. She didn't take money and refuse to give it back. But she has refused to help me get what I, rightfully should be getting. So the Torah says that's also ma'al. That's also a kind of betrayal, a kind of trespass in that sense. So in all of those kinds of cases, the Torah then says there's a sacrifice to God for that too. But what this is saying, and what it says there also is, but that all still depends on your restoring what you did wrong to the person, right? So it's called an asham, and that's a guilt offering. That asham that you give to God only works if you've also done restitution to the person that you have wronged. That's what this little section is. So there's a similar point that we make every year at Yom Kippur, right? When we come to the Day of Atonement and we ask God to forgive our sins, and we say all of that is fine in the realm of your sinning against God, then God can forgive, but God can't forgive your sin against another human being, because that's not God's hurt. You haven't done something only to God, you've done something to a person. You have to go and try to make amends with that person. So this is the practical situation with the then follow through of extra discussion of what if the person that you wronged isn't around anymore? What if there's nobody that the estate cannot be relieved, cannot be replenished by the sin? Then it goes back to the temple or to the tabernacle, to the priests. Yeah, Alan.
I'm not that part kind of stuck out to me because I guess there's a timing issue of when you did the wrong, when you came to the
Right.
the recognition that you have feeling the guilt, but it also lends it to a situation where there may have been a death. You know, maybe you killed him accidentally or whatever the case may be, and that's a whole nother issue. But there's something involved. But and there's it took me to a different direction. It was more than just like a tort, but it was something that was more significant from that.
Right.
That piece.
Right. And especially there's discussion in Audrey's case. I'm just using your name for convenience. Where,
for the record, we are friends, and she would back me up. But that's a whole other story.
Right. But in these kind of like subtle situations where you make excuses to yourself, I didn't really do anything bad. Who knows what would have happened if I would have gone to court? Then the other guy would have beaten me up, and all this kind of other stuff. So you make excuses for not doing the right thing, and then what the Torah discusses is when it finally hits you, when you finally can't evade your sense of guilt. That's when this kicks in. So you're right. There's a time element here that's assumed also, that it doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen immediately. It could be years later. And that's where, the whole situation, it doesn't require somebody to kill somebody accidentally. It doesn't have to be that dramatic. It just could be by the time you want to really make amends, for that person, it's too late. For that person, it's they're gone. Yeah.
So to clarify, is this sort of a sin of omission, that there's something I didn't do, and that's what harmed the other person? Or would this also include if you bore false witness, if you in fact said something that wasn't true, or that harmed somebody else? Is there, how broad versus how narrow is this particular breaking faith?
Right. So it starts with real theft, and then it gets broadened. If you look at the next comment under the line, any wrong, you could read
any wrong toward a fellow man, thus breaking faith with the Lord. Any breach of faith toward another is an offense against God, who commands justice and whose image is found in every human being. Why is the principle of expiation associated here with the case of misappropriation of property? Every breach of faith is a form of theft, stealing another's trust under false pretenses, using one's God-given talents for a purpose other than that which God intended.
Okay, so that's the broadening. It starts with plain theft. It starts with plain theft, and then it takes that and says you can break faith. The two examples that they give here are you can break faith with somebody else. They depended on you to stand up for them, to stick up for them. You didn't do it. But what's the last example that they give? Using one God's given talent for purpose other than that which God intended. In other words, you can steal from yourself. You can break faith with yourself. You can misuse your own assets. And those assets can be money. Real assets are, like Freud said, sometimes assets are just assets, but they could be all these other things too. So that's where we get into a very, very broad thing, which is not necessarily going to be quantifiable, right? You wake up 30 years later and you go, oh my God, why was I, a corporate raider, for all these years when I could have been a public defender, and used my talents that way or something like that. you're not going to be able to go run around and make that kind of monetary, restitution. So it starts with something quantifiable, which you can then actually give 20% extra. That's what the Torah says here. When you finally fess up, you don't give back just $100, but you give back another 20%, a fifth more. Plus, you have to do that sacrifice that I mentioned already. But then the principle is definitely, something to broaden. And what I want to also point out here is a word that appears only in a few places, and that's at the beginning of verse 7. V'hidvadu et chatatam asher asu. They translate it here in the single, in the Hebrew it's in the plural, right? They shall confess the wrong that they have done. That's vidui. That's confession. Like what we do on Yom Kippur, where we go, that's Ashamnu Bagadnu. We have sinned, we have done all of these things. So this is not that common a term in the Torah. And here, with regard to interpersonal betrayal, it's brought up.
Rabbi, unless I misunderstood you, you talked about giving 20% extra. Where'd you get that figure from? I always was of the impression that we're not supposed to charge interest.
This is not interest.
Fellow Jew.
I got that impression from verse 7. Read verse 7.
No, but I used to do.
It's not an interest, it's a fine.
No,
but Marty, it says it right here. He shall make restitution in the principal amount and add 1/5 to it. That's 20%.
This is not about
I used to do arbitrations for up to tens of millions of dollars, and we had a strict rule: no interest and no fines.
Interest is not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is
talking about fines, but we also said no fines. Neither of the above. I always thought it came from some halachic principle, frankly.
So I don't know all of the context of what those decisions were, but fines are an integral part of the halacha, and the punishment of fining people extra over and above the damage that they've caused is central to the whole halachic system of courts imposing these things. Now, maybe what's going on over there is because we're all sort of friends and we don't want to get into all kinds of sticky things, so we work things out in some other way. But what this is about somebody has committed a crime, and they are liable both for full restitution of what they stole, and then they are punished with another 20%. Interest is a completely different animal. Interest is something that, yes, interest is forbidden. Absolutely. Because
if I may get back to something, sir, you talked about this was having to do with Audrey as a witness. She refused to serve as a witness. Would it be okay to pay her to serve as a witness?
No.
I mean, in our country, we have subpoenas when people want to serve as a witness.
If you can enforce it, right? Those things are about enforcement, right? This is about obligation. The obligations that are here are being stated as this is what you're required, but it doesn't talk about actually whether there's any teeth to it, right? Part of the problem here is that a lot of these situations, again, are up to the individual to fess up. If you don't fess up, nobody's going to catch you. Right, so
our system
that's reality.
Our system has the same thing. You can't pay a material witness money. That's not allowed, even in our legal system.
Right, of course not. Right. So we're talking about
expert witnesses, I guess.
Well, expert's a different thing, but material witness, that's what Audrey would be as a material witness.
Right. Expert witnesses are giving information that's general information that theoretically is out there. To be determined by anybody if they had enough expertise. Material witness is about, I really saw XYZ do this, or I really, heard XYZ say this. That's a different thing. That has nothing to do with expertise. That has to do with being on the spot and then telling the truth. So it's a very different situation.
I think the idea that it's theft to not be a material witness is exactly right. You're stealing a person's ability to get justice. Like one time in college, a friend and I were accosted and beaten up by a group of people who jumped out of a truck. And it was in a small town in New Mexico. And the policeman took the report, and then the policeman rounded up people and brought them to my front door to identify them.
Wow.
And that was on purpose because he didn't want me to identify them. So I was very angry. I didn't identify them because now they know where I live. And he stole my possibility of justice. It really felt like a theft. I was more angry at him than I was at the people who did the beating.
Alan.
I just want to go back to the issue of timing in terms of restitution, and to ask to whose benefit, for whom was the 20% intended? Was it intended for the benefit of the aggrieved, or is it intended as a means for the perpetrator to find his absolution?
And there's a third possibility. It's just plain a punishment. It's meant to be a deterrent. If you steal $100 from somebody, if we catch you, you're going to lose not $100, you're going to lose $120. So I think it's all of the above. I think that it could work for different people in those different ways. I think it's very important. We talk about paying our debt to society. We usually we use that word debt. It is important for people to be able to feel that if they've done something wrong, that they can clean their record. It's really important, and it's important to give them the possibility of doing that, because otherwise, again, we've got a stigmatized group of people. Look at our stupid set of laws that stigmatize ex-convicts. Right? We're going to get you coming and going. We're going to lock you up, and we're going to punish you, and we're going to torture you and treat you like dirt. And then when you get out, we'll punish you because you got out. So it's like because we released you. I think it shouldn't be dismissed to give a mechanism for somebody to feel like, okay, I did it. I now have a clean slate. I really am clean and innocent. I paid my debt. And that's, I think, a very humane and important element for us to deal with. I want to throw in one last thing. We've got only a couple of minutes, and I'll Sarita, you go first.
I just was wondering about the juxtaposition here. So, before this, we read about these people who did not commit a crime, and they were being sent out, and there's nothing explicit about how they get reintegrated back in. And here we're talking about somebody who does commit a crime.
No, you yourself pointed out there is elsewhere explicit.
Oh yeah, right. But I'm just saying, but right here there isn't.
Right.
And then here, following that, we have this explicit breaking faith, and that person is explicitly given a way of making restitution and expiation. So I thought that was interesting. That was one thing I noticed in terms of the juxtaposition. The second thing is, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is that I was wondering if this followed from the first, because could the breaking faith be with the people who are sent out or marginalized? And they're in a vulnerable situation. Excellent. And then they could be liable to have people do things negative to them.
Right. So it's an anti-stigmatization manual in many different kinds of ways. Right, to try to keep everybody respecting everybody. I mean, in the Torah Sparks that I wrote for this week, I tried to make a little bit of a distinction about Ben Adam LaMakom and Ben Adam LaChavero, the realm of what we are involved in when we're involved directly with God, and then when we're involved with each other, and how that changes. And that's part of what's going on here, right? There's an acknowledgement. There's this ritual purity, ritual impurity. We have to be very strict about maintaining these things. There are all kinds of rules. And then what Sarita is saying is, I think, a very, important, that the person can be ritually impure. that doesn't give you the right to steal from them, or to ignore them, or ignore their rights. There's two different realms here, and to the extent that we as human beings share humanity with each other, we don't share humanity with God. God is still an other, but we share humanity with each other. Are we going to treat each other like human beings or not? So that's the looming challenge of our day. I wanted to throw in one more thing, and then that's it. And that is, it's like I'm not being fair to do this. I don't care. Reparations, right? What does this teach us about the possibility of what we owe people who we have been mistreating and stealing from in every kind of which way for hundreds of years? All right. Thank you, Yeshikoach.
That's quite a way to end.
Yeah, I know. I was saving it.
Make you want to
20%.
come back next week.